Lucy Gibbs is the assessment manager at Oxford University Press. She has a Delta in English language teaching and has taught in Turkey, New Zealand, and Taiwan. Wow, they're very contrasting places, aren't they? As part of the ELT assessment team at OUP, Lucy's interests include accessing listening skills using AI in language testing and accessibility. Lucy completed the International Association of Accessibility Professionals qualification to become a certified professional in that area and is a member of the Assessment Accessibility Working Group at OUP. She's presented at several conferences, and now she's about to present at this one. So, Lucy, you are going to bring the curtain down on ELTOC Chapter 11. It is over to you.
Oh, thank you, Sean, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I just want to start by saying it is fantastic to be at ELTOC. I am so excited. This is my first ELTOC. So yeah, it's a real honor to be sharing the next hour with everyone, and a very big hello to you all. So Sean told you a little bit about me, but really what I'd love to do is start by finding out a little bit about you. And I have a question, and I'd love to have your answers in the chat. And my question is this: why are you interested in accessibility? So please pop your responses in the chat, and we'll just give this a couple of minutes. Just give you a few more seconds. Okay, fantastic. So it does seem like there's quite a few different reasons for joining the session today. So a lot of people are saying for their own professional development, but also a lot of people are saying because they have students with disabilities and differences and want to be able to support them. So I hope you find this session really useful. Okay. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering in the next hour. So we're going to start by talking about some key principles in standardized testing. And it's really important to go through these principles because they really explain why test providers need to be thinking about accessibility. And then we're going to move on to look at how test providers can increase accessibility to their tests, and especially through the use of reasonable adjustments. And then for the last part, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some really exciting research we're doing around accessibility. And it would really be nice to have your contributions to that research and hear your ideas around it. Finally, we'll open the I'll open the Q&A for that part to get your feedback, and then we'll end with some useful resources. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this session is obviously on accessibility and standardized testing. So let's think first of all about what is standardized testing. And I'd like to see how much experience there is in the room around standardized tests. So we're going to start with a poll. Sean, I hope you're there to help me. So on the screen, I think the poll will be coming up. So on the screen, you should see, here it goes. Fantastic. Okay, so on the screen, you should see some examples of really well-known standardized tests. And I'm wondering which of these you are familiar with. So what I'd like you to do is just check any of those tests that you know. And you can tick one or you can tick all of them. Okay, fantastic. That was a nice quick poll. Oh, it's still going. Just give it 5 more seconds.
It will keep going, so just make a point when you want to stop it. People will answer at different times.
Okay, let's stop the poll there. It seems particularly a lot of familiarity with IELTS and Cambridge, and with the Oxford Test of English. So that's really nice to see. Okay, let's close the poll there and go back to our slides. Fantastic. Okay, so we're all familiar with standardized tests, but what exactly is a standardized test? So these are tests that are designed and delivered in a consistent manner for all test takers. And the reason they need to be consistent is so that the abilities of the test takers are measured fairly. So let's talk a little bit about fairness, because this is a really key concept in standardized testing. And a fair test provides an equal opportunity for all test takers to demonstrate their language ability. So the test process must be the same for all test takers to make sure that that opportunity is equal. And when we talk about test process, we mean test delivery, test design, test content, and test scores. And test providers will often document how they make sure these are fair in documents such as their test specifications. And just to really get across this idea of fairness, I really like this infographic. So here we have obviously a running race, and you can see that there's no way that we could consider this to be a fair race, because the runner in the white top clearly has an unfair advantage in the race with that head start. And because he has an unfair advantage, it means the results of the race will not be reliable, because we're not providing equal opportunity for all the runners to demonstrate their running ability. And really, it's the same in testing. If the test process isn't fair, it will provide an unfair advantage or an unfair disadvantage to some of the test takers. And if they have an unfair advantage or an unfair disadvantage, this will mean that test scores are not reliable. We can't trust them, and they are not an accurate reflection of the test taker's ability. Okay, so fairness around the test and the test process is really, really important. And test providers must ensure fairness in content, in scoring, in delivery, in all their processes. But what about the test takers themselves? So we're going to have a look at a case study and take a really short quiz. Okay, so I want you to imagine 2 test takers are taking a 4-module online standardized English test, and it includes an essay. Test taker A has no disabilities, but test taker B has a mobility disability. And this disability makes it difficult for them to use a mouse or type using a keyboard. They can do those things, but because of their mobility disability, it is slow going. Now, both test takers are given the same time to complete the test. So here comes the quiz. Okay, so my question to you, and this is answers in the chat: do the test takers have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their language ability? So it's a 3-option quiz. Answer A if you think they have an equal opportunity. B if you think test taker A has an unfair advantage. And C if you think test taker B has an unfair disadvantage. Okay. Lots of responses. Thank you so much. Okay, lots of C's and lots of B's. So let's look at the answer and I'll explain it. Oh. There we go. Okay, so the answer really is B. Sorry, the answer is C. So test taker B, the test taker with the mobility disability has an unfair disadvantage because their disability is impacting on their test performance. It's not a test of mobility. We're not testing that. We're testing language. So we don't want their disability to impact on our ability to test the language. Some of you answered B, they have an unfair advantage. Well, they don't really, because they're just a standard test taker, taking the test in a normal way. The test taker that the test provider needs to pay attention to is test taker B, who has the mobility disability. And the test provider needs to be thinking about ways that they can remove that disadvantage of the disability and make the test an equal opportunity for both test taker A and test taker B. So let's look at how test providers can create a kind of level playing field that helps to remove the disadvantage of any disability or difference so that all test takers have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their language ability. And one way test providers do this is through the provision of reasonable adjustments. Okay, and on the screen, you can see many of the most common reasonable adjustments that test providers of big standardized tests provide. So there are adjustments for time, some assistive roles, assistive tech, and other types of reasonable adjustments. And just take a few minutes just to look through those, and then I'm going to give you a short task. Okay, I'm just going to jump a couple of slides to the task. And I'm afraid you're going to need to grab a pen and pencil for this one. Okay, so here's the task. So on the left of the screen, you can see some of the reasonable adjustments we've just looked at. And on the right, you can see the definition of those adjustments. And what I'd really like you to do is just take a few minutes to match the adjustment on the left with its definition on the right. Great, I can see some people grabbing paper. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's fine if you want to put the answers in the chat, that's fine too. Okay, just a few more seconds. Fantastic, lots of answers. Great. Should we move on and just check and let's have a look at the answer keys? Okay, perfect. So I've kind of reordered this slide, so don't get confused. So one Number one, scribe matches across the page to C. So a scribe is someone who writes a response dictated by the test taker. Number two, prompter is E. Number three, screen reader is B. 4, exemption is D. 5, a modified paper is F. And 6, pauses is A. So I hope you managed to get those answers right. Okay. And I'm just going to step back a couple of slides because I have another question for you. Okay, so there we go. Looking at all these different types of reasonable adjustment, which one do you think that is most commonly requested by test takers? Which one is most commonly requested? Okay, it looks like lots and lots of people are going for extra time, and a few more for the assistive roles or for breaks. So let's see. Okay, let's have a little look. Okay, so this slide is some data from the Oxford Test of English, so it doesn't represent all tests. But for the Oxford Test of English, we find that most requests for a reasonable adjustment will be for extra time. And it's particularly extra time on our reading module and our writing module. And the standard request for extra time is 25%. However, we can give 50% or even 100% for test takers who have complex or particularly severe disabilities. Now, the way that extra time is applied to standardized tests can differ from provider to provider. And it can, we'll see why a little bit later on in this presentation. But generally, providing extra time on a writing module is fairly easy. So if a test taker is normally given 20 minutes to write their writing response, if we apply 25% extra time, they're going to be given 25%. They're going to be given 25 minutes to complete that paper. However, applying extra time to modules like listening can be more complex because we can't extend the length of the audio recording. And different test providers have different ways of giving extra time to things like listening modules. So one way, like we do on the Oxford Test of English, is to apply extra time to any thinking time on the test. So, for example, there might be some time on the test to read the task or to check your answer, and that time will be extended. Other test providers might do something like pause the audio at certain points in recording. Yeah, so, and I will talk about why there's differences in how test providers do it a little bit later on. Okay, and just to give a little bit more data, this table shows which disabilities we often get requests for support with. And the most common one, as you can see, is dyslexia. And then the second most common one is multiple disabilities. And these are generally dyslexia plus something. So, for example, dyslexia plus ADD or dyslexia and anxiety. Other types of disability, especially sensory disabilities like sight loss or hearing loss, tend to come a little bit lower down. And one thing, I have a question for you. One thing I'd be interested to know, especially those of you who are teachers, which types of disabilities or differences, because I think dyslexia is really a learning difference rather than disability, which ones do you see most commonly in your classrooms? Okay, so quite a range. Again, probably dyslexia is one of the more common ones, but also a lot of autism or stammers or speech as well. Interesting. Okay, and a few people asked, so OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder and ADD is attention deficit disorder. Okay. Great, thanks for your input. Okay, just switch through these. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about why test providers need to be concerned and interested in giving reasonable adjustments. And we've talked specifically about the need to make sure that the test provides an equal opportunity for all test takers to demonstrate their language ability. But there's another reason why test providers need to be interested in reasonable adjustments and be applying them. And that's because it's a legal requirement. So the law requires that people with disabilities and differences are not discriminated against. And the main law in the UK that protects the rights of people with disabilities and differences from discrimination is the UK Equality Act 2010. And let's just move on and look at a few other laws around disability across the world. Okay, so here we have some, perhaps the world's most well-known disability laws. So in America, it's the 1990 Americans with Disability Acts. Or a lot of countries refer to the 2006 United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And what's particularly interesting maybe about equality law is that a lot of them are rooted in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this means that whatever country, even if a disability law is country specific, there tends to be quite a lot of overlap in what they're saying about the law. And I just wonder, we'll just take a minute. I'm wondering if anybody is aware of which laws are you aware of that protect the rights of people with disabilities and differences from discrimination? It's quite a tough question, but I'm just wondering if anybody knows maybe for their own country. Yes, a few people are saying yes. I'm not sure, but it's something you might. Okay, so Italy, law number 104. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Okay, a few responses to that. Thank you. However, I should also point out that equality law includes an important caveat for test providers. And the caveat is around construct, so what the test is testing. And the law often says that a test provider is not required to change the construct of what they're testing. So they are required to give reasonable adjustments, but those reasonable adjustments don't need to go as far as changing construct. And construct is quite a tricky thing to think about. So let's look at some user cases and really explore construct in a bit more detail. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 user cases. And here's the first one. So in a test that includes a listening module, a test taker with hearing loss requests that the audio is played directly into their hearing aids using Bluetooth. So normally in the test, the audio, for example, the Oxford Test of English, the audio is delivered it's an online test, so the audio is delivered through headphones. So the test taker is sitting at their computer, they have the headphones on, and they hear the audio in the listening module. But this particular test taker has said, look, hearing audio through headphones doesn't really work for me. Is there a way that you can deliver that audio directly into my hearing aid, for example, using Bluetooth? So my question to you is, what would the test provider say? Is this a change to construct, i.e., is the test taker still listening? Or is there meaning there's no change to construct, the test taker is still listening, they're just having the audio delivered in a different way? Or is there actually a change to construct that might mean that the test provider really can't provide this adjustment? What do you think? Change to construct, yes or no? Okay, let's have a look at the answer. So for this one, there is no change to construct. It doesn't really matter if the audio is delivered via headphones or via Bluetooth straight into the hearing aid. We're still testing that test taker's listening ability. And as long as there's no threat to the security of the test and there are no technical issues, i.e., the delivery platform the test sits on will allow us to use Bluetooth, then that's fine. We would be happy to do this. Okay, let's move on to another test case. This one's a bit more complex. So in this user case, a test taker who is deaf requests the audio script so that they can read rather than hear test content. So they obviously can't listen to it, they are deaf. So they say, can I have the audio script so I can read instead? What do you think the test provider will do here? Is there a change to construct? Okay, and a lot of people are saying, yes, there is a change to construct. Okay, and that's exactly right. So now the construct is changing. The test taker obviously isn't listening to the audio. They're asking to be able to read the test content instead. And that would change what we're testing, what we're measuring from listening ability to reading ability. So that would be quite problematic for the test provider. However, there would be some ways that a test provider could support this student. For example, a test provider might allow a sign language interpreter, so somebody who's going to use sign language to sign the content. But of course, then we need the test taker to understand British Sign Language if it's something like if it's a test that uses British English, or American Sign Language if it's a test that uses American English. They might have somebody to read out the content and allow the test taker to lip read, or they might provide an exemption, an exemption, or yes, lip read and sign language, that's also possible. But they might provide an exemption, and an exemption is where it's understood that the test taker simply cannot access that part of the test, and they will still be given a score for that particular module, but that score is based on the averages of the part of the test that the test taker is able to access. And as you can see, you know, those are solutions, but they all have their complications, really. Okay, one more user case we're going to look at. And this one is concerning the writing module of the test. So in this one, a test taker has dysorthographia. And this is a learning disability where the test taker finds it difficult to connect sound to letters. And this results in frequent spelling errors. So the test taker asks the test provider, please don't penalize any spelling errors in my writing. And they point out that at school, these errors are not penalized. What do you think the test provider would say? Would they consider it to be a change of construct if they don't penalize spelling or not? Okay, so let's have a look at the answers. Okay, so this one is a little bit of a yes and a little bit of a no. So it really depends on whether spelling is included in the marking rubric for writing, i.e., is it being measured? Is it being tested? And if spelling is in that rubric, then one thing the test provider might do is say, well, we still have to give a measure of spelling. We still have to mark it, but we can look at frequency. And rather than take into consideration every time the same spelling error occurs, we'll only consider it once. So yeah, it's a bit of a yes and a bit of a no. But not all writing rubrics measure spelling. Some of them focus more on things like task performance or overall accuracy. Okay. So the reason that I wanted really to include these user cases is just to bring your attention really to this tension that exists for test providers between wanting to make a test really accessible to as many test takers as possible, but at the same time, the necessity to protect the construct of the test and make sure that the test is really measuring what it says it's measuring, because that's where the validity of the test comes in. You must measure what you claim to measure. So if you claim to measure listening, you must measure it. If you claim to measure reading, you must measure it. So we've looked a little bit around how construct can impact the kinds of adjustments that test providers can provide. But there are other things that can impact what adjustments can be provided. And another of those things is the way the test is delivered. And nowadays, there's kind of two types of test delivery, really. Paper-based tests and more online tests, like the Oxford Test of English. And both these different methods of delivery have their advantages and their disadvantages. So, for example, things like extra time on a paper-based test, that's going to be delivered fairly manually. Somebody is going to be stopping and starting the clock. Whereas on a computer delivered test, extra time is generally built into the delivery system and delivered automatically. Paper-based tests allow for things like modified papers. So instead of having the test on A4 size paper, it can be given on A3 paper. And this is really good for test takers with visual impairments, in that the font is much larger and easier to see. But online tests might allow for some display options instead, and we'll see a couple of examples of those in a minute. Paper-based, you might also have Braille versions to support students who are blind or have severe visual impairment. Whereas on an online test, you'd be you could use assistive tech instead, like a Braille reader or a Braille keyboard. And then for assistive roles, well, on a paper-based test, you're probably going to have a person providing the assistive role, like a scribe or a reader. But on an online test, the assistive role, again, it could be a human. It could be a human scribe, a human reader. But there's also maybe an option of using assistive tech, like text-to-speech software or speech-to-text software. And we'll look at the assistive tech a little bit later on. Okay, let's move on. And I just wanted to show a couple of examples of display options on an online test. So what you can see on this slide is the standard display option for the Oxford Test of English. So we have a white background and darker coloured font, and it's in around, I think the font size is 18. And you can compare this screen display to our standard screen display to this one. So this is a display option that test takers can select, and you can see this is a high contrast display option with dark background and much lighter text, and also the font size has increased. This is large font size, I think it's 24. But these display options are not really considered reasonable adjustments. They are just good, accessible design. And any user can use them, whether a disability or no disability, and test takers can select them at any point in the test and change their display options at any point in the test as well. Okay, and actually, you know, we love to collect data for the Oxford Test of English and see how test takers are responding to what we provide. And this is some data we collected around display options. And I think this was quite surprising, really. We found that almost 25% of test takers were opting not to use the standard display option, but were taking advantage of especially extra large font and different color contrast. So yeah, an interesting piece of research. So it suggests that, you know, display options are a good thing for us to be able to provide. Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about what standardized tests are. We've talked about things like fairness, reliability. We've looked at different reasonable adjustments and the requirement, and we've also talked about construct. What we're going to turn to now is talk about how test takers can apply for reasonable adjustments. So what is the process? And really, it is it's a 5-step process. So the first one is for the test taker to read the test provider's reasonable adjustment policy and see what is possible. The next stage is really to take the demo test so that the test taker can find out where they might need some adjustments for the test. What are they going to struggle with? Also check the application date, because for reasonable adjustments, test takers often have to apply 6 weeks to 3 months before their test session. For the Oxford Test of English, it's 6 weeks. And that's really just some time, because sometimes a bit of conversation, a bit of back and forth is needed between the test taker and the test provider, just to make sure the adjustments are right and that they are in place. Because reasonable adjustments are a legal requirement, the test taker will be asked to supply evidence. And finally, they'll need to complete the request form. And let's just have a look at that request form. Okay, so the request form normally covers 4 areas. So it asks what the disability or difference is and what adjustments the test taker needs. And the important thing to remember here is that it's always for the test taker to say what adjustments they want. It's not for the test provider to assume what reasonable adjustments would be useful. Also, the test provider will want to know the impact of the disability on the test taker in the test environment. And the impact statement is really important because it enables the test provider to be sure that the reasonable adjustment will be beneficial in removing the disadvantage of the disability, but it won't give the test taker an unfair advantage. And that's really important. It's all about that level playing field. Okay. The final point is that the test provider will want to know that the reasonable adjustment being requested is the test taker's normal way of working. We don't want test takers going into a test and using, for example, an assistive role for the very first time, because that will cause stress, it causes anxiety. There might be some expectations about how that role will work that aren't actually true. So it's really important that we know that adjustment is normal way of working. Okay, let's just spend a couple of minutes looking at impact statements, because they're really important. And a good impact statement will make it clear to the test provider what the disability is and how the adjustment being requested supports the test taker without providing an unfair advantage. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and read these 3 different impact statements and decide which one would be clearest to the test provider. Number 1, number 2, or number 3. Okay, a slight difference of opinion here. So let's go ahead and have a look at the answer. Okay, so the answer was number 3, because this makes it very clear to the test provider what the disability or learning difference is, what the test taker's normal way of working is, how that extra time will be useful in compensating for any disadvantage the test taker has because of the disability without providing an unfair advantage. So a nice detailed impact statement is really useful for both the test provider and the test taker. Okay, so very quick review at this point before we move on to the last section. So we've looked at test principles, particularly fairness, reliability, and construct. And we've talked quite a bit about reasonable adjustments. So different types of adjustment. We've looked at laws, impact of test design and delivery. And finally, we've just looked at the request process. Okay, for this last part, I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about some research we're doing, the research and validation team in our assessment team, as well as the accessibility working group, what we're doing at the moment, what we're exploring. And I'm going to, once we've had a look at this, I'm going to open the Q&A, because it's something that we'd really like some of your feedback and input into. Okay, so it's a little bit complex, but I'll try and keep it simple. So what we're doing in our research is exploring construct. And our research has kind of 2 ways of looking at construct. Do we want construct evolution, or do we want construct revolution? And evolution is really where we can offer reasonable adjustments without changing the construct. We're just increasing what we can do. And we saw earlier, we saw that example of allowing a test taker to use Bluetooth to have audio delivered directly to their hearing aid. So there was no change to construct, but it was something new for us. And actually, we're getting quite a few requests for this. But it's an easy yes, really, because like I said, there's no change to construct. Revolution is a bit more complex. And revolution is where construct starts to kind of shift a little bit if we allow more reasonable adjustments. For example, assistive tech. So nowadays there's speech to text, which changes audio into a transcript, or there's text to speech, where written text is audio delivered. And so what we wanted to do is find out a little bit more about how we should view construct if we use assistive text like text to speech or speech to text. And in the first stage of our research, we approached some disability advocacy groups, and we approached 4 groups. One that focuses on visual impairment, another on hearing loss, another on dyslexia, and another that specializes in advising on assistive tech. And what you're going to see in a minute is a few quotes from these groups. And these quotes, I want to just stress this, they don't reflect the group's experiences on the Oxford Test of English specifically, but their experience with language assessments in general that they've observed. So what did they say about using assistive tech even where it changes construct? Let's look at the first quote. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a minute to read this.
While they're reading, Lucy, just be aware of the time, yeah? There are 14 minutes left.
Great. Okay, so this group is really telling us, look, it doesn't matter if you use assistive tech. The test taker is still demonstrating their language skills. Even if there's a slight shift to construct, they're still having to engage with language and use that language. So they are pushing for us to kind of go down the assistive tech route, basically. Let's have a look at another quote. And this one is from the Assistive Technology Advocacy Group. So again, just take a minute to read that quote. And this one was quite an interesting case because often in tests, people are allowed a reader, somebody to read the text for them. But this group, this assistive tech advocacy group was saying, but that's really not how people operate in real life. You can't just have a reader when you're at university to read all your books for you. You're going to have to engage with assistive tech. So surely the test should also reflect that student's normal way of working and how they're going to have to work when they've taken the test score and they use that test score to get into university. So I thought that was a really interesting point about reflecting normal way of working. I've just got one more because I do want to get into the Q&A. Okay, and this last one is again from the assistive tech group. And they were pointing out that the use of assistive tech is helpful for people both with and without disabilities, that we all have our own preferences for how we learn or how we get information. For example, I know that sometimes when I'm in a meeting at work, if feeling a bit tired, I don't particularly want to listen, and I'll just switch on the transcript and read the transcript. Or I'm sure, you know, when we're watching TV, sometimes late at night, if the sound isn't great on the TV, put on the subtitles and read the content as well. So assistive tech gives everybody a choice, not just people with disabilities or differences. So to summarize so far, what we saw advocacy groups were in favor of wasn't evolution, but revolution. And they're stressing that by enabling more assistive tech, we allow students to demonstrate their actual language skills more clearly. It reflects their normal way of working, and it allows for personal preference. But what I'd like to do now is open the Q&A and get your thoughts around this. So for example, you know, when you're teaching and you're with your students, what are they doing? Are they using assistive tech, for example, reading audio scripts rather than listening to audio? Or you're welcome to ask questions on any part of this presentation or any questions that you really have about learning and accessibility. So I'm going to go ahead and open the Q&A.
Yeah, so you should find some questions there in the Q&A. Remember, they've been asked throughout the session, so because sometimes context is a little bit missing by this point.
Okay. I'm just going to have a look. Yeah, so there's a really nice question here from Eleanor, and this is something that we wanted to explore in our research. So Eleanor asked, how can you check listening for people who are deaf? And that's interesting. And we did ask that question to the disability advocacy group that supports people with hearing loss. And they were saying, well, actually, people who use sign language consider sign language use as listening. So yeah, that was an interesting piece of research for us. Another person asks, when, this is from teacher L, when accommodations are provided, are they also noted on the results? And that is a really good question. And sometimes, yes, often they're not, but they might be flagged, especially if assistive tech was involved, that might be flagged on the certificate. Okay, and Katrina asks, do you ask for proof or just accept what people say? So part of the application process for reasonable adjustments does require evidence, because this is a legal, reasonable adjustments are a legal requirement, so they must be based on evidence and proof. Because like I say, we want to be very, very certain that we are creating equality. So we want to remove the disadvantage of the disability, but we certainly don't want to give an unfair advantage, because if we do that, then the test results are unreliable. So we do require medical evidence. And we do know that it can be quite difficult to get medical evidence. The type of medical evidence that test takers get can change from country to country. But we have to have something that gives us that reassurance that, that providing the reasonable adjustment is fair. And sometimes there will be a little back and forth with the test taker to say, look, we need a little bit more evidence here. Can you provide something around this? Okay, and Ella asks, sometimes our students face accessibility challenges when taking standardized tests. What can we do? Thank you for putting that on the screen, Sean. What can we do as classroom teachers to help them prepare and feel more confident in these situations? Yeah, it's a really good question. One thing that might be possible is, for example, if they've been, if the test provider has said, yes, we can give a scribe or a reader, check the reasonable adjustments policy very carefully, because it will tell you exactly how that scribe, what that scribe or reader can and can't do in the test. And then it might be possible, for example, to practice with the demo test, have somebody stand in as scribe or reader and have a practice. So that's something that might be useful. Safa asks, what role do advocacy groups play in promoting revolutionary ideas? Well, for us, we were just exploring concepts really, and sort of seeking their advice as experts in the field. They're not always language testing experts, but they can give us good indication about how people with different disabilities, their normal way of working. And that's really interesting and useful to us. And Sabli says, I have senior students who had a stroke and have speech impairment. For writing and speaking, any alternatives? So probably for this test taker, you might be looking at assistive roles. So if they have mobility disabilities as a result of the stroke, then maybe a scribe, somebody who will write their response for them, might help. I imagine extra time could be useful as well, especially if speech is perhaps quite slow. So that might be something useful. Generally, so Anne-Marie asks, when receiving the results, is extra time mentioned or not? No, on the Oxford test, well, for the Oxford test of English, I can say no, it isn't. Ruby R asks, what if an adjustment is offered but declined by the student? So that's the part of the application for reasonable adjustments where I said it's really important that it's the test taker who decides what adjustment is appropriate to them. It's not for the test provider to say, oh, you have this disability, okay, we're going to give you this. It is absolutely important for the test taker to tell us. And we do find that test takers with the same disability or difference have different ways of working. For example, we have a lot of applications from test takers with dyslexia. Some will say, I just want extra time. I have poor working memory. I'm a slow reader. I'd like extra time. But others might say, I'd like extra time, but I'd also like a reader. And we do have certain rules about a reader, but there are some parts of the test where you can request a reader. So it's absolutely up to the test taker to say what they want, not for us to tell them. And this might be something that you've noticed, or it seems that you have noticed with your own students, that even people with same disabilities have different ways of working. And that might be due to the severity of the disability, or it just might be their own preference. They might want to be very, very independent and not use assistive roles at all, but just find the extra time is helpful. Okay, and RNB asks,
oh no, we seem to have lost her.
Did she lose her? I couldn't work out if she had paused or we lost her.
No, I think we've lost her.
Yeah, well, no, she's still there. I was looking at the question, but about to pop the question up, and it's like, did I move the question? It was
We have a frozen Lucy.
Download speed has gone below the maximum, so she's got out of the room. I mean, she only had a minute or so left, but it would be nice for her to say thank you, say goodbye.
The wonderful Stuart has just popped up the positive washback position paper link, which is a great, useful tool to look at. I've read this one through. I enjoyed it a lot, and it's all about the impact that testing has on teaching. So how we can use testing effectively to make sure that... Hello.
Right.
But we're going to have to stop there and just very quickly in our last minute talk about...
We lost you for a second.
We lost you, Lucy.
There, Lucy.
Oh, I was talking away.
Okay, yeah, we weren't sure because you very wisely paused before you answered the questions, and you had said let's speak. It was R&B's question, I think, and you started to kind of read it. I could see that you read it, and then you just stopped completely.
Oh.
So hang on, I'll just put your slides back up and I'll disappear for it. We are coming to the end, but please do take time to finish off. Okay,
fantastic. So thank you so much for all your questions. They were really great, and I was just saying I wish we had more time to answer them, but I will have my email up on the end, and you're welcome to email me. But yes, just a few resources. So we have a really good blog page on our site here, and it talks about all the different kind of concepts in assessment that we've been talking about, like construct, fairness, reliability, validity. So you might want to explore that. If you want some ideas for supporting test takers with differences in disabilities, please see our position paper on inclusive practices in English language teaching. And also, if you'd like to see an example of a reasonable adjustments policy, that's there too. For your own personal development, I find it really useful to take courses on accessibility. And here are 3 different course providers that run courses around accessibility. So you might want to check them out and see if they have anything that you would find helpful or useful. Okay, it is 4:30. I can't believe how fast that hour went, but it was fantastic to spend it with you. Thank you all so much for joining. And yes, like I say, there's my email. And if you do have any questions, please do feel free to email me. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to take part in our talk.